All right, welcome to the Golf Coach Podcast, Steve. How you going, brother?
Doing great. Almost awake. Second
Well,
cup down.
second cup of coffee. It is early. Hey, I do appreciate you coming on at 6 a.m. there in Singapore, and it's 8 a.m. here in Australia. It's kind of we're nearly on the same time zone, not too far.
Yeah, it's pretty good being on this side of the globe. Yeah, the east side.
Yes. Hey, so whereabouts are you coaching now, Steve? Where are you, mate?
Facilities Laguna National
Yep.
in Singapore. It's on the east coast, right by the main airport here. Awesome facility. Yeah, it's definitely one of the top facilities on in Singapore. 36 hole. We've got a DP event here next year, so yeah, it's a great spot with a huge short game area, which is one of the draw cards for me coming over here actually.
Well, they've got a DP tour event coming up there. It's
Yeah,
still
Feb.
awkward to say that, isn't it? I still can't say DP. It's always
Yeah.
European Tour. Is it their first one they're hosting?
I couldn't actually figure out what it stands for. I tried to Google it the other day. I went down a rabbit hole and could not find DP, what it stands for.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you know what it stands for?
No, not a clue.
Fucking useless.
So what is it? What is it their first time they're hosting a tournament there?
No, they've had Tiger out here before. They've had European, Asian Tour events. No, they do have events out here every couple of years, and lots of big amateur events. They had the Queen Surrogate Cup here this year as well. So no, they have events here all the time actually.
Oh mate, well
So
just
it'll be
save me a
fun.
spot. Save me a spot on the floor, Steve. I might come over.
Come on over.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
will.
KG, it's going to happen.
Yeah, let's get it all done. All right, so you're in Singapore now, and you've been there. What you got there towards the end of COVID, and before that, Asia coaching over there. And
Yeah, exactly 10 years.
oh, great! So obviously you're an Australian PGA member. What drew you to Asia in the first place? Before we get into the coaching stuff, what drew you there?
Yeah, it was probably I was probably 8, 9 years into like coaching in Australia. And the programs that we run back in Melbourne, we used to have a lot of international students come over, like Koreans, Malaysians, but basically just a lot of different types of Asian students come over. So that kind of started me going over at different times for different reasons, to do follow-up coaching in Korea. And I guess I was coming to the end of one of my friends encouraged me just to come over to get into another side of golf, which is more of like the management kind of business side. And he said, "Oh, you should come out to watch these, I guess you'd call them like business management seminars that this guy ran every year." So yeah, it was good. The first one was actually in Malaysia. The second one was in Thailand. So it was just to kind of get a bit of a taste of what's going on and try and maybe broaden my scope of, golf versus like just golf coaching. And and I guess it hit a point. I was in transition with position in Melbourne, and I'm like, yeah, I think I want to like take the leap and maybe look at a position over here in a country, and that's where I started to get a little bit deeper into visiting countries, looking at like, English versus non-English, all that sort of stuff, and eventually it was okay. I really suck at languages. I think I can only be in maybe like Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, perhaps, because it's not that hard. And that was me.
It's interesting you say that, right? I was just recently in Indonesia for a while, and I went to a hitting studio there, and there was a lady working on the front desk in Bali, and she had very little English, and I was waiting for the owner to come, and I said, "Well, just hop in the simulator. I'll give you a few tips." And I had her without knowing Indonesian to a degree. I do know a bit, obviously, all the greetings and hello and all that stuff. And I actually said to Kerrod after I called him, I said, "I don't know how Stevie Giuliano does this. I'm struggling to communicate." And he said, "Well, a lot of the time Stevie's dealing with people who are English speaking, right? So you're dealing with
it, yeah."
Yeah. So then he obviously raised that awareness to me. So yeah, and I guess people listening to this, right, would know you more than they know me for sure. If they're on social media on Instagram and SGG Golf Coach. And I guess what's always attracted me to you early on in my coaching career was there's a few things that attracted me to different types of coaches and people that I wanted to learn from. And some of them were, I guess someone like Kerrod Gray, who started, he was working with that program where you had supervised practice going on. That was kind of
Yeah.
intriguing. That was away from the usual type of golf coaching, and I guess people who taught a system, like a bit of
Yeah.
method coaches, people, I always thought that they really knew what was going on. And
Yeah.
I've always said that every time I watch your students, right, they all share very similar attributes. And for
Mm.
me, when a coach can do that, they've obviously got a very good understanding of what they're doing. And there's no doubt, right, you're one of the world's leading golf coaches, right? And you can argue with that, but I think that's quite true, right? And tell me about, when you got into your coaching, when did you down this kind of teaching, I guess, a system? Is that what you'd call it?
Yeah. I guess you would call it a system. I think to answer that, in some respects, always.
Yes.
But let's say for the first 15 years, pretty clueless system. Or I would say
Yeah.
not a very functional system. And I think everyone thinks their system's pretty good. But to be fair, it was pretty hosh posh and match of, things I've picked up over the years. But one of the things I would say about everyone that's coaching, everyone's teaching a system of sorts. They
Yes.
sometimes don't know they are, sometimes don't say
Yeah.
they are,
Yeah.
and maybe don't realize until they go down maybe some different rabbit holes and whatnot. So in that sense, I guess it's easy to talk about a system and say and just use full swing as an example.
Yeah.
I'd even say even coaches that aren't swing centric coaches have systems around how they get their players to improve, like player development systems. Maybe it's
Yeah.
more, target orientated practice and constraint type practice where they're trying to push the mental boundaries or, target specific stuff like that. So I think even those types of coaches have systems around how they get their players to improve, and we all do to some extent.
Yeah,
But
I agree with you there because, obviously, I will get you. Sorry to butt in there, but I
no,
was
you're
talking to
good.
someone about this once before, right? To
Yeah,
another coach around it, and he said to me, "Oh, he's not you, like someone else, right?" Like he said,
yeah,
"Oh, he's a method coach or something," and I stopped him in his tracks and I said, as a coach, right, we all have preferences of things that we like to see and how we like people to move. And
sure.
there's no doubting that, right? And I said to him, I'm sure there is some consistency in your wording on a day-to-day basis, what your goals and
Mm.
what you're wanting to see from a certain student. I said, there is no doubt that you have preferences. He came back to me a week later and said, you're exactly right. He came back to me with he sent me a message back
Yeah.
on Instagram, and he sent me a list of a few things that he loves to see. And he said to
Mm.
me that, he felt obliged to tell me that, he does, I guess, have a system as well. So
Yeah, and I think sometimes those say types of instructors that think that way have almost tighter systems and methods. Let's say so-called,
yeah,
method or other system instructors do. I almost think the longer down the road you get, and if I take my hat off, I've got lots of hair, but it's definitely grayer than yours, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
if I grew this even a few days, it looks
yes,
pretty weird compared to yours. So that
yes,
doesn't happen. But I feel like the longer down the road you get, and I'm about 22 years deep,
yeah,
I actually think your system is super broad and it can go narrow. And that allows you to kind of help a wider range of, I think, especially better players, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that, you need more freedom in what you deliver,
yeah,
from a standpoint of technique anyway.
yeah. So
Versus,
yeah,
sorry, the more that we kind of funnel into avid golfer, less skilled player, maybe less hand-eye coordinated beginner, I think the system starts to get into method,
yeah.
because they need every little piece that they can get just to be, just to get the ball airborne sometimes.
And I guess for people listening, right, when we talk about systems or methods, I guess
Mm,
in this talking about is I'm not going to say an inbuilt program, but certain preferences on the way that you like things to move and to see from a standpoint in the golf swing to help it be functional, right? That's what we're kind of
Totally.
talking about here, where we're we're disregarding the outliers, you know, that we do see on tour and whatnot. And, there's
Yep.
certain types of terminology where we hear coaches talk about matchups. We're talking
Hmm.
about things that we kind of like to see. Would you like to kind of go through a couple of things that potentially that you learnt, I guess, that was when you said you're a bit hogwashy in the start of your kind of
Yeah.
coaching career to now? Where have you tightened it up, and what have you kind of changed? And just maybe a couple of topic areas. I'm sure it's a broad thing, obviously.
Yeah. Well, one example that does come to mind, like when you ask, so maybe like two examples, and this is more just around like movement. So again, I'll just go a little bit like swing centric stuff. So, as I was kind of like learning and watching like Ledbetter tapes, and being able to go to Las Vegas and go to Butch Harmon's academy, and
Wow.
Jim McLean's academy, like early days, and Rick Smith. They'd always talk about like a letter L backswing, we'll just say.
Yep.
And we know that there's a certain amount of like vertical and backhinding of the wrist that kind of causes that position. And we just might call it a letter L, or we might just say like, okay, just cock the club up to that kind of position.
Yep.
So I'd teach that, and that was fine. And then we might have a sort of a certain way that the body like rotates or moves. And so I guess I would teach that as a system, if you like, to a lot of golfers. Okay, they didn't have that, I would put it in there. Maybe they had too much of it, and I'd leave it because I thought it was cool, because that's what kind of Ledbetter was teaching.
Yep.
Swing and set, and Felder was doing it, and all this sort of stuff. And Ernie Els did it. And move or fast forward maybe 15 years, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, you start to get more into anatomy, which I wish I did a lot more of it in school, and you actually start to understand function of movement, and then more specifically maybe how certain grip types would add or subtract to being able to do that, even certain positions in the fingers or the palm. And
Yeah.
because we go down rabbit holes, I mean, if you've ever looked at Morad stuff,
Yes.
it's super detailed, and it's like there's no stone that's not unturned in
Yes.
how really intricate positions cause, certain club face positions, and as I said, plus minus subtraction of this, and even a golf machine for sure, goes pretty. It goes into as much detail as you
Yeah.
need to. And I'm not a golf machine guy, as far as I haven't gone through the book, but I've studied a lot of good information around that gives me what I need, for my headspace.
Yeah. Yes.
And so, yeah, I guess the answer to the question is now, 15 years later, I still teach that, but I know a lot more about how it's created
Yes.
and how to change like small parts of it. So I think that kind of tightens everything up and gives me a lot more confidence when I'm, trying to teach maybe a high soft shot in a bunker, and know what to change, or it's a full swing, a takeaway or downswing position. And I know how, these sort of things influence, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what you're talking to, obviously for the listeners, the top of the backswing, the L shape between the lead arm and the shaft, that type of kind of preference that we like to see. I notice with a lot of your students, that's not really narrow, right? If you're looking from a face on angle, your shaft and left arm potentially around, is it 100 degrees roughly that you
Yep.
like to see?
Yep.
Yep.
Something like that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and that position that you backswing, which I guess we could say is more width on top of the backswing. It's not very narrow. It's got more width. And why do you think that's a good key to good ball striking, for you with your teaching, having it wider at the top?
I mean, as a general rule of thumb, and good players can definitely do different things. So I'll talk about, the avid golfer that we teach for the most part is when they start to either overload the wrist, so that would be like, starting to get beyond, say, 90 degrees, and they start to lose, let's say, some structure in the right arm, this thing starts to bend beyond. I mean, almost, at least I see it in my teaching, 99.9% of the time, they don't know how to coordinate the downswing, that they don't get any load in the downswing. In fact, the club gets underloaded really early. You see a lot of throwaway early, just not a dynamic move. And that's, being able to get into a more structured, stable position at the top, for me, has huge implications on how the downswing starts and is formed. So it
Yeah,
becomes pretty important.
I couldn't agree with you more there. So in regards to the backswing, it takes 0.75 seconds on average. The downswing's 0.25 seconds. I think the
Yeah.
better we can restructure a nice sound backswing, the better the chance we've got the opportunity for the student just to react into the golf ball naturally,
Mm.
right? And not have to
Yeah.
try and think too much about, we see all these types of instruction out there like the spin and hold and all
Yeah.
this stuff, right? But which I know we talk about a lot. But in regards to that structure at the top of the backswing there with the right arm, or let's say the trail arm, but the right arm for the
Yeah.
right-handed golfer, I think that's a clear thing that we see amongst a lot of really good ball strikers is the right arm for the
Mhm.
right-handed golfer not bending very much past 90 degrees. You'd agree
Yeah.
with that, right? And
Yeah. Totally.
I put a post up recently of, it was from the open of a lot of students, a lot of the tour pros who are playing like, Cam Smith included,
All
on
your
the top of the
students.
backswing. Yeah, all the students, all the players, right? And I said, all these guys share a similar attribute of, I asked people questions, right? What can they see similarities? And someone said the
Yeah.
trail arm. And I said, I agree, the trail arm there isn't bending. And someone said, what about Cam Smith? And I said, well, if you look closer, you'll actually see that it's not. It's just the way that
Mm.
he's tilted and the way that it looks.
Mm.
And I think for the top of the backswing, if your right arm is too bent, there's not much opportunity to hold any load in there, is there? There's only one way for it to go, which is unload.
Yeah.
You'd agree with that, right?
Yeah. Well,
And
what you could say, it's a very it's definitely like an overloaded position in that sense, and so it just starts to unload very early,
yeah,
regardless of what the player does with their lower body. Said,
yeah,
especially for someone who's less dynamic and kind of less coordinated.
yeah. So we'd hear the term like casting, or
Yeah.
potentially that right arm could get a little bit stuck behind them, right?
Yeah. Well, shameless plug.
Yes,
I've posted
it's
I've
okay.
posted a few videos of one of my students I've worked with here in Singapore for a while, and a girl, and she's a very kind of new golfer. At least she played a while back and hadn't picked up a club forever, and she's like one of the golfers, and came up with this epic cast.
Yeah,
When she started with me, she had this like epic cast, and we've kind of transformed really her whole swing. Now she has just a nice amount of load, and so many people have asked me like, how do you get rid of that cast? What were the drills? And it's you can't go down that rabbit hole with them, because you got to spend probably a few weeks explaining it, because there's so much detail that goes into almost not doing the downswing, and it's a lot of backswing stuff. And I have done lots of downswing stuff with her, and even a lady that came to me yesterday from Philippines, who I've coached on and off in person and online over the years. She still has this little bit of break at the top and a little bit of throw, and we did some stuff with her yesterday. And again, shamelessly, I'm gonna post her lesson on YouTube coming up soon. So, we got her into a really more structured position even than where she was, and got her to move a little bit more dynamically in the downswing. And she still has this little bit of throw. And I said to her, and she's like, "Oh, I'm still doing that throw." I'm like, "Well, to be fair, you've been doing this thing forever."
yeah,
And I said, "It's kind of like you're going to have this residue that we probably can't scrub off no matter how hard we try
yeah,
over the years. It's
yeah,
just it's just there." And it's not that she won't get better dynamically and things won't improve, but sometimes golfers have been doing something for such a long time, you just can't rub out maybe that last part. And does it really matter? No, because she probably drives that anyway, and she probably can hit her hybrids better, but she's a bit of a shitty short iron player.
completion.
So I said to her, there's pluses and minuses to do what you do. It's not the worst thing, but you also don't want to be fatting all your iron shots for the rest of your life, or not being able to strike them a little more solid. So yeah, there's pluses and minuses there.
And on that topic conversation there around kind of shaking the behavior, I guess, and it's something that people got to understand that especially that in the golf swing, right? That is what I call, that's a reaction, right? So starting the transition, the backswing's going back and then the club's about to start going the opposite direction. That
Mm.
student of yours has been reacting that way by throwing the club away due to
Sure.
being forced there for a long time. And it is very difficult to change your reaction. And that's a very difficult part of the golf swing to change. And it's
Yeah.
okay to, like you mentioned there, right? You can have parameters, I guess, or variances which are manageable. You know,
Yeah.
it's okay for her to throw it away a little bit because she'll have strength in the top end of her bag, but we just need to try and
Sure.
help her with the lower part of her
Yeah.
bag, and come up with different strategies, I guess, around that to try and help get that little bit of lean there, right? So
Yeah.
and throwing the club away from the top is for the person listening, I guess, is a disadvantage because the club head is going straight past your hands pretty quickly. There's a very good chance you're going to deliver the low point behind. You're going to add a lot of loft, top it, and fat it, right? Let's
100%.
let's talk about one. Let's talk about one more, I guess, swing preference or something that we like to see.
Mhm.
What's something that
Yeah.
you love to see in the setup? Yeah, throw something at me.
What's something I like to see? Um, I feel like a lot of students, and again, I won't kind of go into better players here because there's so much variation. But a lot of students that come to us are so unstructured in even just like how their arms hang at setup. The left arm's off to the side, the right arm might be too much over, or sometimes both arms are off to the side.
Yeah. Yes.
And obviously these players are really going to struggle to get any sort of form of decent strike or even like arm structure just because of setup. So I'm definitely big on getting the left arm a little more on top of the pec, especially for the guys that come to us that are a little thick chested, either because they work out a lot or maybe they're just, bigger barrel or bigger belly or barrel. So getting those arms a lot more on top, gives them a fighting chance. One of not getting the arms like too kind of stuck behind them going back, but just either just to get them back in front and
Yeah.
deliver some sort of good impact. So I'm definitely really big on that. And again, because a lot of students that come to me have really poor impact alignments, the hands, left arm and club being more in line and forward with definitely a more rotated left hand with a stronger club face, meaning not open.
Yep.
With the ball, if anything, more on the back side of the arc, not too much on the forward side where the driver would be. I often see ball positions up near driver or one ball back from driver. And it's just really hard to get into any sort of solid impact there. So having the ball back from, let's say, inside the lead heel or where the driver would be, or even back three, is a really good start for a lot of golfers, when they're hitting any sort of club. I mean, even sometimes they say, oh, do I do this with a 5-iron? Yes, with the 5-iron as well, just that you might widen the trail side or the right foot.
Yeah.
So those getting into that sort of setup, hopefully with good balance points, etc. 55-45 on the lead side, even 60-40. It would probably save an hour or the first lesson every single time when a student comes up to me.
Yeah.
It would save them a little bit of time if they watch a good setup video.
Yeah.
Or maybe one of our videos that we've done on setup.
Oh, mate,
because we often have to spend a whole session just working through that. And I hate teaching setup and grip because I think it's kind of boring, and I'm kind of a fast-paced moving coach when I teach. But sometimes you have to spend a good session or two just getting some structure in there to again get to start the process with them.
It's amazing how set up, and I completely hear you, right? I got a student the other day from Jakarta, and he's been getting lessons for 4 months or whatever on a daily basis, or no, it's like a weekly basis or whatever, like a lot of lessons. Right? He hopped on my online, and within 24 hours, we had him at the top of the backswing, beautiful structure, looking great, and all we did was talk about setup and a little bit of arms backswing, and the thing about doing a setup lesson is I feel like at times you're not offering enough value because because the person's not hitting a shot and seeing a nice ball flight. But in the long run, they're going to be beneficial for it. And, I'll send off someone who's come and spent, a lot of money to hang out with us, right? And I've
Sure.
just tweaked their grip, like he's mentioned about, especially the beginner golfer. I really think having, 60-40, so 60% there, a long left arm into the working
Mm.
some kind of straight arm drill shots, like if anything,
Yeah.
like some push extension stuff early. And you
Yeah.
send them away and you go, oh, that person's going to be good, but do they trust me enough? Do they
Right.
trust me enough that they need to come back and do it again? So that kind of takes me into, I guess, another topic area, right? And it's important that after that person's, you've done that initial setup with them, that they come back and you can continue to tell them what is there to do next.
Mm.
Do you not do one-off golf lessons anymore?
I don't generally do them
No. And how much do they not work?
though.
Just help, just kind of clarify, because I'm
Yeah.
always banging on about it.
So I'll retract that because I did a one-off sometime last year or recently, but it was actually to a pretty competent golfer.
Yep.
And he said to me, "Oh, I want to do a package with you, And I said, "I can't do more from a full swing standpoint, so I don't think it's valuable unless you want to game route or
Okay.
talk about on-course stuff." So basically, I didn't think he could help him because he was he was at like 3 handicap and he was just having some issues around contact and stuff. And we did some simple things. And I said, "Look, if you just do this, you'll be fine."
Yeah.
So in that sense, it was a one-off lesson. But I think what you're talking about is,
Yeah.
someone that's coming in and really needs development and somehow, comes to you like in a once-off situation and wants to go away. And that's, not really going to work for them long term. So in that sense, yeah, I really don't. Most people are doing some sort of series of lessons and longer program for sure.
But it's kind of like what, right, in regards to that lady who was casting the club, and you had your DMs full on Instagram of people asking you, probably
Mm.
coaches like myself annoying the shit out of you about how'd you fix that. And
Yeah.
you're
Oh,
like,
yeah.
well, hang on, it's more than one lesson. And hang on, I can't tell you in one message. So like for someone who's got a real underlying, I guess, issue that they want to change,
Yeah.
then I think if they want to get rid of the cast or they want to get rid of that over the
Mm.
top or, get rid of the shanks and the path too far to the right, it does take a series of, because we've got to work on setup to adjust
Yeah.
that. And then we've got to work on backswing structure and then potentially how they're going to react into the golf ball in regards to pressures or whatever. It
Yeah.
does take a series of, a bit of learning to get the head around it, right?
Sure. I almost feel like I'm actually making this up on the spot. I almost feel like
Yeah.
if someone's been doing something that's a real like inbuilt pattern, let's just call it for 10 years,
Yes.
you've got to take 20% of that time frame
Wow.
to
Yeah.
before they'll actually be able to do it functionally. Maybe not even on the golf course yet, but let's say functionally, off or even like on the golf course. So the reason why when we teach juniors that we can change them so fast, they don't have any patterns yet. The
Yes.
reason why we can take a COVID golfer that's been working at it for like a year and a half and change them in like a month or get really good like results and pretty sticky results as well is they've only been doing it for like 1 year or whatever.
Yeah.
And the kind of like the list goes on. And then we obviously get, the elder golfer who's been doing something for 25 years and we can't even like budge them like this far or they
Yeah.
tend to like keep reverting back. It's because they've got inbuilt for like 30 years. So all of a sudden they need to go down, rabbit holes that they probably never should go down. And so for them, it's a little bit more like tweaking and just trying to get them, a little bit more distance or maybe change the setup. But to functionally change a movement in that instance is probably like never going to happen for some people. And that's like fair enough. That's not what we're about like every single day. And I just think that's the reality of it. The longer that you're teaching, you just figure that that's kind of what's happening or what's going to happen with certain. and
And
their experience levels, etc.
yeah, and I agree with you there. I agree with you a lot. And in regards to the student who has been doing something for a long period of time, coaches, right? We have, quite a numerous amount of ways that we can shift a pattern, right? We can shift the way that
Mm,
someone's moving. And when you're dealing with someone who has been moving a certain way for 25 years, then it might take a couple of goes to try and help shift it. Like we've got a kit bag full there, right, to try and help someone shift. And we can start to come up with ideas like, oh, hang on, that person can't move in this way or can't commit to moving in this way. I can still get the same result, potentially help this person's path from cutting too far across the ball.
mm,
I can potentially something different here to try and help them take it to the golf course, right?
absolutely.
And I heard Sean Foley talk about it once before, where he said the best coaches in the world can generally just find that a bit quicker. They can find what works at times a
Totally.
little bit quicker. And yeah, so tell me a little bit about a student, so someone who's listening, right? And
Mm,
I'll often say to my students, like they'll see their golf swing, and the lady who you said was still kind of casting it a little bit on the
yeah.
range. And for instance, for me, my best golf swings in my studio here in my garage, right?
Right.
And then my next best golf swings on the driving range when no one's watching. And then
Yeah.
my next best swings when I play 3 holes by myself, and it progressively
Yes.
gets worse, right? As the
Totally.
situation gets harder and harder and harder. And I'll have students of mine who, one of them, he shot 65, he won a pro-am, and he come back to me and we film it. He goes, "Oh, Toby, I'm still doing it." And I go, "Mate, you just
Mhm.
shot 65." It's about, I'll often say to students, I'm showing you the 10 out of 10 where I want you to be.
Yeah.
If you can go from a 5 to a 6 to a 7, you're going to play great
Sure.
golf still. It's about getting there. And
Mm.
you'd agree with that, I'm sure, as well. But tell me about strategies on, I guess, taking, from the practice range to the golf course. And how does someone bridge that gap with their golf swing changes?
So I think there's two areas that I would like tap into. There's the area which is um, translating a really like sterile environment, in your studio and being able to do something with, to be fair, like no distractions, and the cameras are set up so that all the angles look pretty good. And then, like progressively like taking that onto the golf course, you're not really reacting to any, I would say, some often when you're on a range, you just kind of like swing and trying to hit a position. And I don't think you ever really have a concern about like where the ball's going. So you can commit to a movement, let's say a new movement, with not too much stress about the outcome or the result. And I think when you translate that to the golf course, people get like very reactive to, okay, where's my ball going and how's it going to finish? And if I aim it straight, like the coach told me, it's going to slice into the. Might do it on the first hole, and then the next shot they're aiming left again, and
Yeah.
pretty much everything that you've told them to do gets completely unwound because they're in survival mode on the golf course.
Yeah. Survival mode. That's a good way.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, I mean, I talk about that a lot with my students. I said that what happens on the golf course is you just trying to get the job done, and you don't really, and that's for everyone. So they're just trying to get in the house, and as I said, they're in survival mode. They've got to make sure the ball gets in place, so they know where to aim it, and they kind of know what they have to do. And in some respects, it comes down to what I mentioned before. It takes time to slowly like change it, and then shift that to the golf course. So that'd be kind of like one side of it. And the other side is, where we talk about is getting them into a more, say, reactive state, like their routines, target orientated practice,
Hmm.
and we have to be accepting that at that point we don't get into, okay, you haven't hit your position. One of the things I always find interesting, my good friend in Denmark, Andreas, who I'm sure you know,
Yes, of
like
course.
I feel like he's got one of the best holds on movement patterns, and he definitely has a system, and his players have like great style, but they all kind of look different. But when you look and the same at the same time. But
Yes. No, I agree.
when you look at a lot of his players indoors, because he does coach indoors a lot, it's like, oh, the positions are so clean and like blah blah blah. And then when all of a sudden you take that swing onto the golf course, you don't have the backdrop and you don't have a line, and all of a sudden you're just in the open space. So a swing just, whether it's a little there or the head moves too much this way or too much that way or whatever, it all gets washed away in, the open field of the golf course. And it kind of doesn't matter. Do you know
Yes.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it kind of doesn't matter really at all. So, and we do often teach in these kind of boxes, right? It's a box mat, and often it's indoors or whatever. And so we get pretty caught up in, very specific like positions.
Yeah.
And I've probably gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but to circle back into what I sort of mentioned, I think it's also the coach's ability to start to get them into target orientated practice.
Yeah.
Okay. Chris Mason talks about mental process, which I like. So what's the process? Stand behind the ball, create a feel, create a visual picture of the shot we're trying to hit, walk in, address, go. So it's getting him to do that, to take that sometimes long walk from the range to the golf course and trying to like bridge that gap a little bit.
Yeah.
And as a coach, be okay with, the student has to survive and they're just trying to hit a shape, or they've got to kind of do what they're comfortable doing on that specific day. And that's why, someone can shoot 65 and come back and go, it didn't look a certain way. I think they've defaulted into 30% of what they're still really comfortable doing, but they're doing 70% of what you want them to do, and that's also fine.
Yeah. And yeah, I completely agree with everything you're saying there for sure.
You don't have to.
No, I do. No, I do. I do about bridging the gap, but it kind of got me thinking a little bit about the training side of things, right? And when we talk about certain positions, right? We're potentially working on someone's swing technique for a reason, to help lower their score, right? And to help adjust their ball flight, or to help adjust strike, to improve it. So, we want them out there to give themselves the best possible chance to react on the golf course. But I've often heard of, some of the tour guys when they're warming up. And I think there's a lot to learn watching them obviously warm up before a round. And a lot of them talk about, they want to hit a ball left to right. So they'll hit 3 in a row left to right. And they're not too caught up in, I guess, the landing zone of it. They just want to be able to see it's moving that way, and they want to see they can move it right to left. They don't want to see what they're capable of doing that day. And I think as, students or people hitting golf balls, they've got to stop bridging success in regards to running back to the camera and looking, is my trail arm great? But I guess more along the lines of, have I hit 10 in the dispersion that I'm happy with? Like, and while still working on a little bit of the block practice. So maybe focusing your attention on, I call it a pizza slice. So like a pizza slice, you're at the pointy end out towards the target. Have you hit 10 clean strikes in a row on a ball flight that you similar like to see within that pizza strike? And then I guess if they can do that, then they can start to probably build some more trust. But if they they can build some more trust in it and take it to the course, where if they keep running around, I've only done it right once in 5 swings, then all of a sudden they're starting to lose that trust, right?
100%.
Yeah. And I think that's coming a way that we could be probably looking at different types of training for sure. How much of an emphasis, right? Obviously you teach a lot of tour players, right? Is that right, Steve?
Not as many as I used to, when I came to Singapore, but definitely used to a lot more like in Malaysia and in my travels since COVID. But definitely, I'd say more elite juniors, college players. Some of those are turning pro or have turned pro. So I would say 20% of my students are that type of golfer.
So in your history, right, of teaching the tour player, and they go away for I was talking to one of my friends yesterday on the podcast who is a what do you call him? Strength and conditioning coach, but he deals with just top end, Olympic athletes, champions, and does golfers. we're talking about when they go on tour and they come back, and it's about just trying to maintain when they're on tour, maintain their
Sure.
physical strength and mobility. And how often does a student, when they go away for, say, a series of events and come back to you, do you see much regression in certain like fun up and grip? When a student goes away and comes back
Yeah.
when they're in performance mode, do you see that a bit?
Absolutely. I think it can be environment. I think it can be just what, as you said, they kind of regress back into what they're kind of comfortable doing,
Yeah.
maybe like patterns. And, an example would be one of my college kids who's, one of the top amateurs in Malaysia. He plays in a windy part of the US, and, he'd had a few issues with, creating a little too much height in his like natural swing and ball flight. And, we're always trying to kind of reduce his spin loft a little bit through different techniques. But, he often comes back and he's got his upper center like way forward of his lower center, and that becomes his setup for everything.
Yeah.
And that kind of starts to have implications on like how he moves and all this sort of stuff. So I think in that, if someone's not monitored for a or sometimes the environment, something like wind. Okay, well, they've got to survive. They've got to hit the ball low. This is the best way that they know how to do it. They haven't maybe developed a technique that can take loft off the club or reduce spin. They just think, well, at least I can hit it low this way, not realizing that the ball's still going to spin and they're still going to have, other issues with maybe other clubs that come along the way. But I think like anything, the environment. Sometimes it's wind. Sometimes the ball starts, maybe they slip into a little bit of a pattern. The ball starts leaking a little bit more left to right than what they like to. They just figure out, they start aiming more left, and all of a sudden, they develop this little bit of a cut pattern which they're not used to seeing, and they're like, why am I cutting the ball? And it's often just getting them back into, okay, you've slipped a little bit here. This has happened, and we need to kind of get back into like where you were. The good thing with better players is they leave. We've had them somewhere before, so they have a history, and so often we're just getting them back to like where they were.
Yeah.
And it's not like we're trying to reinvent their wheel every time, because that kind of swing doesn't really change that much, to be fair. But when setup changes, then positionally it can start to change.
Yeah, I agree with you there as well. Like I was back to, I think regression is an important thing. I think we need to look at that a lot, for myself as a coach as well, is to not try and reinvent the wheel each time, right? Is to look back at what's worked previously. And, recently I teach a really, really good senior amateur golfer here, and he's the best over 65-year-old in New South Wales.
Nice.
I don't know if he is in the country, but he's a lot of fun. But he comes back to me and his grip just gets a little weak, and he gets a little leaky. And dead set, I strengthen it up. I tell him the same thing. He hits 6 balls in a row, knocks a sign out on the range. And I go, let's go have a cup of coffee, and he comes to me at that time like, oh, I've lost it. This is happening. That's happening. I go, mate, just strengthen that left hand a little bit. Look at your club face here at a certain position, and everything's all good. I think a lot of the time when we lose it, people start searching for a new thing
100%.
or something new. And I guess the beautiful thing I love about my online coaching is I've got it all saved on file. I know what's worked before. I know what's worked previously. And, I think searching for new information, I guess that's a killer, right? We could probably dive into that now is, the information overload that's going on online, and I think us as humans, and I mentioned it a few times on this podcast, is that we're really good at consuming information now. Like when you first started coaching, information from, like when you were playing.
Yeah. It was kind of funny. Like it was, I bought every coaching summit VHS, or maybe they just come out on DVD. No, it was actually VHS. I remember receiving big, heavy boxes from the US. So that I believe the first US summit was 86 or 88, and David Ledbetter and Hank Haney are up there delivering.
Wow.
And so I had all those VHS And I guess I started buying those tapes into my second year as a trainee. So we've got, and it was every 2 years. So it's like 88, 90, 92, 94, blah, blah. And then the Aussie summits, I think they started maybe a year later. And I think the Aussie summit started, I'm going to say like 92 or 94. So, Jim McLean and these guys and Ledbetter, had come out to Oz, or at least Jim McLean did, and Rick Smith did. So those were kind of really early source tapes for me. The only guys that would bring out any information, again, were like Ledbetter, maybe Butch Harmon had something, and Jim McLean was producing a lot of books. I used to get into a lot of Jim McLean stuff. It was great.
Yes.
Used to love watching him present,
I
at
still
the
do.
summits and stuff. And yeah, so and really, a lot back then, you just used to go into these old bookstores and find these books. Like I've got, I think, 3 different versions of the Golf Machine that I found in these old bookstores, and they were like $7 or back then. And I can't even remember the price. And yeah, I've got so many like old books that I know I've got stored back in Oz somewhere. So it was just buying books, and again, like Ledbetter and McLean were really think of that were actually publishing books like regularly. So every time it was like, there's a new book coming out from them, it was like, oh, awesome. And then slowly, with internet and whatnot, we started to get maybe a little bit of, DVDs. And then I can't remember, maybe there's a little bit of stuff on YouTube. And then, all of a sudden it's just like waves and waves of information, early stuff. And to be fair, a lot of it was in person, like fly to the US, go to watch Dave Milne in Perth, when I finished my traineeship, go to the US and spend a month there and shadow like coaches. And I did that, for the first 3 or 4 years out of my time. Because that's the only way you could, get information. Whereas last night I'm on a call with a friend of mine in Thailand who's a good coach there, and we're just chewing the fat on stuff. And, last week I was on a call with a Scottish guy in a coach in Perth, and it was kind of like the same thing, and they just asked me questions. So now you can literally just get on a call, and I know most coaches are open to that.
Yeah.
And you can send a swing to, a guy that you follow, and most of the time they're going to be nice enough and give a little bit of opinion on things. So it's just completely changed, hasn't it? It's so cool. Yeah.
But I tell you, when I was listening to you talk then, right, about Ledbetter, McLean, Harmon, and I guess as much as you weren't getting, you were getting little information, you're getting some bloody good, rock solid information. Like we're talking there about 3 of the best coaches, right? And definitely the biggest influence on the coaching industry, that's for sure, is those guys. And that's great. Like I think that you probably drummed in a lot of their stuff that, it's probably really embedded in you, because you're probably rereading that information, rewatching that information, and it's all you got. So you really learnt some really solid stuff early on. Where today, right, there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of stuff, and a lot of these people who are presenting the information to the students as well, you don't really know where they're coming from, right?
Yeah.
And I think
I don't know if I had the best, the best education. I had an education, but one of the things I would say, and sorry to chop you off, but I remember really early on learning about like impact alignments, and this was when I went to the US the first time, and I literally sat on a range for a month and watched golf schools at Rick Smith and Jim McLean's, and they're teaching a lot of like beginners and intermediate players, and they're just talking about impact and lateral backswings and like these like punch finishes, and I'm like, I haven't heard that before, and I'm literally just started coaching, and I'm at a golf club that I did my traineeship at. I'm like, this is so cool. Like I can go back and I kind of roughly know how to teach it and how to move someone. And the big thing over there, they were moving students. They'd move them into position and move the wrist back and show them how to hold, and they'd stand somewhere and the student would like stop and punch. And I'm like, I've never seen any Australian coaches like do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're just talking about, the right arm position and or whatever. And so it was really like useful to me.
Yeah.
I could go back and implement that almost like straight away to my, club golfers, and, go back to system. I started to have a system like an impact.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't even know what I was kind of doing. And I'm not saying I'm concerned, it's interesting now with like a new golfer coming out, and there is so much cool information, and there's like force plates and how the pressure moves around. And I sometimes think, do they know how to teach like a structure and someone that can just strike the ball solid and like move through the ball? Are they getting caught up in, maybe a little bit too much information too early? I don't know, because I don't watch them teach, but sometimes I talk to some of them. And I think at the end of the day, our goal is to get the student to hit it solid, have some direction control, and ultimately create, enough speed, to move the ball down the fairway. And that in and of itself, I'm not saying it's easy to do, but that's the essence of what we're trying to help a golfer do from a ball striking standpoint, for when they come to us on a golf course, obviously.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like the amount of students that come to me, I've limited in-person lesson schedule now.
Right.
And I only do minimum 1 hour lessons, and you pretty much got.
Because you're dominating online.
I'm enjoying online, right? For certain reasons that we have spoken about, right? Is because I can get people to commit to me for 4 to 6 months.
That's awesome.
And I'm down here, 2 hours south of Sydney, and golf is, people love their golf down here, but it's not as competitive golf, right? So my students online are the complete golf nerds, and I love that. I'm talking to guys, like some of the conversations I'm having with them, I go, am I talking to some of my coach friends here? Am I talking to, these guys? But
educated, right?
Yeah, they are very educated. But a lot of the time, right, I have an in-person lesson, and you hear the student out. You got to listen to them, right? A new student, and each time a student comes to me, I'm lucky enough that people who do come to me are a bit of golf nerds, I guess. I probably charge a little bit more. I charge more than anyone around. So if you're coming to me, you're into your golf. But they've consumed a lot of information. And, I had one the other day where a guy comes to me and goes, he's off like a 15 handicap. He's struggling with contact, and he's talking to me about how he's not using his legs enough, and he's not, spinning enough on the downswing. His hips aren't opening enough. And, well, mate, you can't hold your balance. You can't deliver the club to the back of the ball consistently. And I think a lot of people are getting sold stuff that they're thinking is important, that's not important. So what I mean by that is like hitting the ball far, spinning your hips, whatever the terminology they're coming up with. It's all sexy, right? It's all sexy. It's not sexy, to watch a YouTube video on how to grip it nicely and to how to hold, some nice arm structure through P3 to P9 or something simple, right? It's not sexy. And I think a lot of people are losing focus of what's important in the golf swing and what's not important. Do you agree with that?
Totally. And I would say it's filtering. Like most people aren't good at filtering. And where do you actually start? And I think our job is to filter their information that they have and come up with a plan that this is the priority. Like this is where we start. Okay, you need to get this solid first. You can work on some of that in time, like when you need to. Rarely it happens occasionally. Does a student come and they hit the nail head on what they're actually doing?
Yeah.
And most of them are then just coming to me or you for direction.
Yeah.
That can be fun. But as you said, most of them are going down rabbit holes that they don't have any business going down. Yeah. And they need to go like 10 steps back.
Yes.
Before they even get to think about that piece or part or whatever.
And for students listening to this, right, and I will always talk to my students about this when they'll report to me for a lesson and they will tell me, Toby, my right arm's doing this, my hips are doing this, I'm not tilting correctly, I'm not flexing my left wrist enough.
Right.
But I go, well, hang on, what's the ball doing? Tell me what the golf ball's doing. Like, don't tell me what you think you're doing wrong. I'll tell you what you're doing wrong to potentially to help the ball. And I think a lot of people get caught up in looking at the golf swing and they forget about reporting what the ball's doing. And we're experts in helping that golf ball go a little bit better, right? And I think for the student listening here, they need to be if they're getting golf lessons, directing their information to the coach, focused on, contact, strike,
Yeah.
potentially what you're feeling internally, not so much of what you see. Like, leave that up to us, right? You'd agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, because everything that we're trying to do from a development standpoint is it to influence what the ball's doing.
Yeah.
Better the player we get, we get more intricate. We're able to use TrackMan to know, launch angles and things like that. But for the most part, if someone's flat topping the golf ball, we kind of know why that's happening, and we know like the process. And it doesn't matter sometimes what they're trying to do. It's like, this is the direction that you should move in if you want to fix that top shot that you keep doing, or the thin shot, or whatever that is. So the golf ball is definitely the best barometer to understand kind of what's going on.
Definitely. And tell me about now, I want to learn a little bit about, like, you teach a lot with TrackMan, right? When did you start using TrackMan?
I think I got mine 4 years ago, but I definitely had, other launch monitors before. I had FlightScope before that for 4 years maybe. So I guess I've been using launch monitors for about 8 years, but first seen a TrackMan when I was a trainee. So that's...
Oh, wow. That's when they were the big boxes.
It was a pretty big box, yeah. Not the biggest, but it was the second biggest, I think.
And when did you learn? Because there was a bit of a shift there, right, in coaching around what caused the ball to curve in the air, the relationship between path and face. And I've even got a video of Tiger Woods talking when he's younger, and he's doing a what would you call it, like a bit of an exhibition show in regards to how he curves the ball. And even the way that he was explaining it to the viewers or people watching it, the patrons, was he was actually wrong in what he was explaining it. He was talking about how he aims the face. The face is what's causing the ball to kind of curve. And I kind of kept rewatching it. It was an old one. I thinking to myself, hang on, this is pre-learning about how the ball curves. When did you kind of know about that? When did you find out?
That's a good question. I feel like it was more around the D-plane era. And I can't remember what. I'm going to say it was late 2000s, maybe. I think there started to be a bit more information on like D-plane and how the downward and outward component like affects path, or kind of shifts the path around. And maybe back then, although this information, if you look at it, has been around for like such a longer time than that.
Yeah.
And then I guess because of the way TrackMan reads the data, it reads, it reads off the target, excuse me. We started to see that, a draw shot, the face was open to the target and close to the path, which I think, as good as that information is, too confusing for everyone to kind of understand. So I almost never have that up on the screen, and I never talk about it. I'll always just talk about the face being somewhat close to the path in order to cause like a draw shot. I never say open. It sounds interesting, but people's heads explode. And I mean, that sometimes is a rabbit hole in a lesson that you don't want to go down, in my opinion, unless unless the student wants to know that for different reasons. So it was probably around that maybe late 2000s time.
And did that or anything, or it didn't make much of a change?
Make much of a change. I think it just just kind of gave more clarity in that area. But without a doubt, in the mid 2000s, I was also saying swing more, like the ball starting more left, swing more right. Like I would definitely teach that. So I mean, none of my players lost their two cards or kind of left the game. So maybe it's it wasn't like the craziest worst information, but definitely it was like, oh, okay, that was incorrect, and that's that's fine. So it was probably around that time.
It's crazy, that, isn't it, in regards to like where the ball starts. And
you weren't coaching yet, so
no, I wasn't coaching in 2000. I was just I was getting my Guernsey for high school, mate. Year 7, I think.
There you go. I was going to say, like, you were just knocking it around the park.
It's interesting, we're coming up to an end here, but talking about
fossils here. feel
But
like I'm talking with a fossil.
no, you're not a fossil, mate. You don't look it anyway. The only reason people know your age is because you keep talking about it. You
Right.
still look young. Hey, and in regard, right, like when I'm teaching, and I'll use, like I guess for me, I use a GC quad, and I'll use it at the
Mm,
start of the lesson, and I'm very rarely, I guess, surprised in the numbers I see. Right, I generally
mm,
will be pretty close. I'll have a bit of a guess in my head sometimes. I'm playing a bit of a game,
yeah.
energized, and I'll find I have to turn it off after about 10 shots. Sometimes I can get caught up in as a coach.
Sure.
I'll move it, but also the student gets caught up in, like, I'll say, I want to see sometimes potentially how far their path is to the right and face and what it,
Yeah.
and I want to get it down to a certain parameter of what I like to see. And then I might open my out and the student knows that. And the student starts to go, they start to kind of focus too much on it. Do you find in your coaching that you have to turn it off at all or
Yeah.
hide it?
Not turn it off, but definitely not put emphasis on it after a while.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like you. It's a bit like filming a swing. I do film it to give them feedback, and
Yeah.
I also want the data there just for feedback. So selfishly, when I make a make a change, and sometimes like a cool change, maybe it's a speed change or it's a big like path change, I've got the data there that I can show them, or then I can use for social media. So that's the selfish part. So
Yeah.
because sometimes people want to kind of see, okay, oh, the speed's increased, or okay, you shifted that. So I think the data is good just for feedback,
Yeah.
and then when you get to better players, it's a super useful tool when we're trying to hit certain windows of like trajectory or consistency of maybe like a certain shot type. Like
Yeah.
I want the swing direction to be between negative, we'll say 3.5 to 4, and that's like the variance, like it's a 5-degree variance. Or when we're doing distance control with pitching and we're hitting, let's say, a 55-yard pitch shot, okay, the speeds have to be, with a certain wedge, the speeds have to be between 55 to 57. Like there's a tight window there.
Yeah.
So I'm getting him to hit speed windows, or I might be getting him to hit like shot shape windows with swing direction, or club, or
Yeah.
parameters, I should say.
Yeah.
So that's where I like to use it with better players. For the avid golfer, it's a lot more like general. Okay, they're swinging like 8 left, ball super cutting. We've made some change. Okay, now it's maybe now it's 0, or it's it's a little bit left or to the right. So we can see like huge changes there, which for them I think is interesting. Just perhaps look at like 1 or 2 numbers sometimes.
I'll often and I agree with you as well in regards to like looking at for the better players as well when they're searching for
Mm,
something and consistency as well. I guess as well, I will, where say someone's path, a couple of kids I teach, right, their path's mega to the right.
mm,
If I'll look at it and go, I'll double check and go, okay, great, we're still around 0. We're hitting it like shit. We might be 2 or
yeah,
3 to the right. We're not hitting it nice. I'll work on face contact now, but it's good to know path is fixed up. Like even though the ball might be doing some funky stuff through the air, that could be
sure.
just delivery of club face or whatever, but I can at least
100%.
see that the path is okay. Track, I just got to try and fix up the delivery.
The other thing as well, I would say, sorry, just because I think it's kind of interesting, it just came to me. Sometimes with let's say developing golfers, maybe a good developing golfer, they're swinging a certain way, delivering the swing direction like -3, hitting down nicely. The ball should be like maybe drawing or coming out pretty straight. And all of a sudden, like one goes way left. Sometimes the student thinks that they've swung a completely different way. And I think sometimes like having, a TrackMan up there and seeing the series of shots, I can go, actually the last 4 swings were in this, parameter of what we're looking for, but 3 balls did this and 1 ball did that. And they think they've made a completely different swing. And I can say with conviction that the swing shape was identical. For whatever reason, like, lost a little bit of club face control, or, something happened. And that's the nature of the beast, right? They're not maybe at that level where they're that refined yet. But I think often having that feedback makes them comfortable that they're not like searching.
Yeah.
And it's much the same with driver. You hit it off the toe of the heel.
Yes.
I mean, you feel like you're an alien out there. You've done something completely weird, but you just kind of mishit the face, and the swing actually looks the same, or the data is almost exactly the same. And one ball's leaving the golf course, and the other one's going down the middle of the fairway. So, yeah, I think that helps sometimes as well.
And I talk to my students a lot. I agree with that one. Especially for someone who's got a path mega to the right, with the guys giving me a driver lesson the other day, right? And mega right with the driver, and he would obviously snap hook it, right?
Yeah.
And then he'd get one out of the heel, and it would just be in the next suburb to the right, because it's just going to cut out of there, right? The gear.
Yeah.
And he's like, see, two completely different golf swings. I go, no. Same golf swing, different face contact. And I'm like, this is why I need to get your path from being so far right to being more neutral, so that when you do strike it differently in the face, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And I try to convince the student that I'm under the impression that I know with my good players is that if they hit a little, and I hear DJ talk about this, right? They hit a little draw, they hit a little fade down the fairway with their driver. I'm not going to, I don't want to write people off here, but a lot of the time that is just due to the strike of a good player. They might not potentially be trying to do that. That little draw or that little cut, they might just catch it out of the heel and they hit a little fade. But as long as you're looking at that pizza slice, it's there.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think that they meant to do this, but you'll see them take their hand off. It's just strike on the face, but their path is pretty neutral and their angle of attack is where they'd like it. So they're not going to be all over the place, right? You agree?
I do.
Hey, I can't end our conversation and not talk about social media, right? Hopefully you got some time. But talk to me about, when did you start your Instagram account and why?
I'm going to say 5 years ago, maybe longer. And there was just a picture of me and my dad and my brother. My dad's at my brother's wedding, so that's probably still there, like my first photo.
Wow!
If you go right to the end, if you go, I don't know how many thousand posts back.
It would be thousands.
Yeah, I don't know how many posts I've got. So what was I going to say about that? Yeah, maybe the first posts were a couple of social posts and things like that. But I guess your question is when did I start to use it for golf?
Yeah, of course.
And I remember making a concerted effort. I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago, where I'm like, okay, I think this is because I did lots of Facebook, and Facebook was actually cool back then. I know you probably don't know what that is, but
no. I got it from my business.
You don't know Facebook, yeah. So yeah, we're doing lots of Facebook, and then I don't know, things just switched, and it was kind of weird at the time. And you'd know both of these names. So I remember there was a guy named Jeff Ritter.
Yes.
Well, there is a guy named Jeff Ritter who's a kind of good mate, and I bought him out.
Yes.
I think is he Make the Turn, MTT.
Yep.
And George Gankus, who's everyone knows George Gankus, GG. So those were two guys. I'm like, whoa, they're killing it, and 1,000 followers, and George had 2,200 or something like that, and I had 5, and I'm like, but I feel like this is something, and maybe they had more than that, I might be, but they definitely, maybe one of them had 10,000 and some had 7.
Yeah,
but
I remember Gankus being 60, 70 when I first was looking. I remember that.
60, 70, yeah,
1,000.
60, 70,000.
Yeah, he's 300,000 now, but I remember when
I can say with conviction, I remember those guys hadn't hit into the 5 figures, whatever it is. Yeah. Yeah. So they were at 7 and 8. So, and I'm like, oh, they're killing it. So I just thought this could be a pretty good for me to showcase my content, because I could see it was something. And I just made a concerted effort in my mind. Okay, I'm going to do 2 posts a day because I had content. Back then I was doing magazine articles, and my cousin would come out and film me, and we had, if you go back to the start, you'll see these kind of pictures of me in Nike gear and stuff, of putting or doing a backswing or whatever, because I was doing all these articles for different magazines, and that was a lot of my early postings.
Yeah, it was still images back then, right? It wasn't a video.
yeah, I was killing it with the images. I was like, this is great. It was great. And so I thought just stick with 2 posts a day. And, I was obviously coaching full time and stuff like that. It was so weird back then. I think even videos, like you couldn't have longer than like 10 seconds or something weird. So I can't remember. And like the game changed when you can do like 1 minute. So I was like, oh, great. And I was doing these short game schools, and I was traveling around Asia. And so I was filming these short game schools. So I started to like chop them up, and I was posting them. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, can you come to the Philippines and do this short game school? And can you come to Indonesia? I'm like, this is great.
And that's because they were seeing you on Instagram. Is that why?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And then people started DM, and I'm like, and I remember the first time someone had DM'd me for an online lesson. I'm like, I don't think I even responded. I'm like, what's this person like spamming me on?
Yeah.
And then Baden reached out, and he's like, I'm doing this app on Skillist, and I see you've got a presence. He says you should start doing online lessons. I'm like, that's dumb. Why would I do that? And I think he asked me for 3 months or longer, and it was just the volume of requests that I started getting on Instagram to do online. I'm like, maybe I should start doing online.
Yeah.
And then I got on board with Baden, and as long as it had been asking me, I think I was there.
Yeah, you would have.
And then that like really like took off. And admittedly, I don't do much online now because I've kind of pulled a bit away from that, but I still do enough. So that's kind of how it all started. And I think back then it was, as Gary Vee calls it, it was hugely underpriced attention to be on Instagram, like hugely. And now I have zero attention because I'm not producing timely content. I'm still doing like kind of boring like before and afters and things like that, which it just doesn't get much traction. It's not a big deal. It's I think times have changed, and that's fine. But that's kind of when I started, and there was definitely like a golden period there, maybe 3 years ago, maybe it was like 2017 to 2019, where the traction was really huge for someone that that had been on there for a while, timely content. And I think now you can still do it. It's just you have to be a lot more creative. And
what was that like? So you went from, I don't know, what do you got, about 50, 60,000 followers or
something like that, yeah.
So it steamrolled from 17 to 19? Is that when it steamrolled your account?
I don't know. I mean, again, it was pretty underpriced attention. So if you think, but if there was just 30 guys, and I'm just throwing a number, it's just obviously not even close to true, but if there's just 30 guys producing timely content, and there's still all these like millions of golfers, like, oh,
capture.
I grew. Yeah, you just get like hundreds and hundreds of followers like per day. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And it was just, again, underpriced attention, and there weren't too many guys doing stuff. So maybe my content even wasn't that interesting, but there was just not too many people producing content, So
it is.
So I think that I really think that was the deal, because there just wasn't a lot of people out there doing it, coaches out there producing content.
How did you, as a coach, handle that? Did you get addicted to seeing it just going crazy like that, like from an ego, centric kind of point of view? Like, how did you not get too caught up in it? It's difficult, isn't it?
It's a bit difficult, but for me, and maybe it should change now, but for me, my whole reason for doing it, and I probably still say this now, is it was just to create more awareness of what I do, a broader like audience. Because for me to do a short game school, or give a lesson and show a good before and after or whatever, just me and my student are seeing that, or the 6 students that attended my school are seeing that. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to show, and again, back then it was only a minute, but a minute of, what I do to like a broader audience. And obviously that's where like YouTube and other forms, you can do much, much longer form content for sure. But it was just that very like punchy back then, and the feedback was like so fast. So I wouldn't say it was addictive, because for me, I just committed like to 2 posts. That part I was addicted to and I'd committed to. But it wasn't like, I'll post like 10 times because I'm like, it's growing. It was just like, be consistent, do 2 times, stay authentic, Again, I really use the Gary V model, which is how do I do
Documentation.
it? Documentation. Yeah, it was always like documenting like what I do from like day to day. I wasn't like really a stand in front of the camera like content. I think that for the most part like resonated with a lot of people. Steven's actually a golf coach.
Yeah.
He's worked with this student for 2 years. This is what they did then. This is what they did now. It's a before and after. And even my last post is the lady who, come and see me
Yeah.
for the first time in Thailand, just a very avid golfer in 2019. And she's seen me in Malaysia, and I seen her when I went to and then she traveled to Singapore to have 2 hours with me yesterday.
Mm.
And that's her progression.
I think as a coach, I've learned a lot as well from like watching you. You know what I mean? And I think I think a lot of other coaches have kind of watched the way that you work, and the way that you go about your business. I think it's been a very valuable tool to us, as young coaches coming through, and to kind of have those, I guess, influences that we see, right? That's how we're sourcing our information today. And
Sure.
I'll often catch myself saying to my wife, "Oh, I read about this today," and I got to keep telling myself, "I didn't read it. I watched it." You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
right.
Like I was a big reader, and I'd go, "Oh, I read this today about gut health. I didn't read it. Sorry, darling. I saw it,
Yeah,
or I saw it here." And for me as a coach, it's important to me that the people who I follow on Instagram, or coaches I follow on Instagram to try and learn from, I'm very selective, I guess you could say, in regards, because I'm very big on information and how I'm absorbing information, and
yeah,
I want to make sure that I'm absorbing the information I want to absorb, and stuff
yeah.
that I believe in as well, to a degree, while
I like
still
it.
being open minded.
Yeah,
So if I see people out there splurting stuff that I know is not true, because we know that is out there, right? Where people are, talking about stuff that's not proven, I guess. And I think I love the Athletic Motion guys. They're often,
yeah,
I think they're really good. They spit just straight facts,
yeah.
and I enjoy learning from them. I think as any
Hmm.
coach should be on their YouTube channel and learning from them. I think
Right.
basically because a lot of the time they are not coaching; they're offering education, if that
Yes,
makes sense, in regards to,
totally.
they're not talking preferences, they're not talking things they like to see, they're talking straight facts. You
Yeah,
know,
just kind of like what's going on with certain players and how that maybe maps to what amateurs do and all that sort of stuff, right?
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm pretty big on that, and then, in that Instagram thing, to kind of finish on the social media stuff, is like when I did first start it as well myself, or first started watching it.
yeah,
It took years before I started my own account.
yeah,
For coaching, it was like you. I remember KG as well in Perth. I only
yeah.
followed about 4 of you, and I was sitting there
Right.
like, well, that was before I even knew. I think Andrew,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Andrew Rice, and I remember I reached out to you, and I was like, I think I said to you on my first messages like 5 years ago or something, "Sorry for copying your format, but I didn't know what to do."
Oh,
You know,
yeah,
like I didn't know what to do, and I think it's a really valuable tool. Coaches are learning as well, and being a little bit careful. I'm very much myself as well, not getting in front of the camera, and I've limited a lot of my conversation around tips and tricks, because as we were
sure.
talking about earlier on, that and stuff that
Yeah.
things that happen and cause certain positions on. We can't be talking about the old position like you mentioned at the top of the backswing, on how it's supposed to look when there's grip types and how
Yeah.
your arm is resting across your chest. That all influences that look. So we've got to be careful on what we're putting out there, right?
And I think largely what we put out, I mean, it's obviously a reflection of, who you are and what you do, but it's also a reflection of trying to attract, like like you mentioned before, like why did I do that, or why did I start
Mm,
to like post? And for me, it was really simple. It was to get myself busier to a broader audience, maybe even like a global audience,
yeah.
um, to allow myself to create a bigger brand. So maybe I could charge a little bit more because
Yeah.
I got busier, and like just to kind of like, yeah, move my coaching business in like a certain direction, because yeah, I mean the busier you get and the good, the better job that you do, you're able to kind of open up more doors. And that could be a new coaching position, if that's what you're looking for, which happened to a really good friend of mine, Golf.
Yeah.
Like his ability to, create content at a really like high visual
Yes.
level and informative level. I mean, he's a really smart guy. Actually, him back to his home country in Germany and got him like an amazing job at one of the best clubs in Germany. All that was like through IG, and I
Yeah.
believe that's like pretty powerful. For me, it's been a little different. To travel around, whether it's my short game or full swing stuff, or run golf schools, but it's created like awareness beyond my, we'll say, 10-kilometer radius.
Yes.
And I think it has for a lot of golfers. In your case, it's created a worldwide online coaching business that because you've used it in a very like personal way that's allowed you to grow. And let's be honest, that may not have happened without Instagram, that platform.
No, of course
and
not.
I think it's super cool that, Kerrod can do something very different to what I'm doing, very different to what you're doing, different to what Golf is doing. And yet we're all golf coaches and share so many of the same like beliefs and ideas on, we're in a private, chat group on Instagram, right? So we're all like very close and share like very common goals and ideas in that sense. So that's just the power of it. It's so interesting how different people can have different success with it.
I love that too. I love that. And I often say to everyone about, I talk about golf in general. Like, I was sitting there with Kerrod when, to think about without Instagram, I guess, and without YouTube for Kerrod, Kerrod and I are sitting there, in a bar in Bali, hanging out. He's from, the other side of the country. And we're close mates. We talk on like a daily, pretty much daily basis. We're going on golf tours together. We're sitting in a bar in Bali. Yes. You're a YouTube star. Sorry. Star. I'm here, got a successful online coaching business, which has been great for me and my family. And you can get whatever you want out of this game of golf. If you want to have some fun with some friends and golf of an afternoon, if you want to play at the top level, if you want to coach like Golf, at a national level or what you're doing, it's there for you. And golf can offer that for you. And Instagram, without Instagram, I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have my online coaching business. I would still be, what was classified as a successful job, being a head pro, getting up at 5 a.m. every on a very little wage on Saturday mornings, dealing with printers and scorecards, where now it's gifted as
Golf contacted me on Facebook years ago. I know you haven't heard of that platform before, but and we became like you and Carol, like really good friends, and we talk like super regularly and share like ideas. We've traveled together, and it's very cool. Like we're in a network together of golf instructors, all the same. But it's kind of like the social media scene has definitely, brought everyone much, much closer together, and, like-minded people kind of get drawn to each other in that sense.
Like-minded people, exactly right. My old man talks about it, right, where even though we're getting way off traffic here, we'll have to finish it up soon. My old man talks about, he's into a certain type of motorbike, right? And he's on a motorbike Facebook group with a couple of hundred guys, and they love a certain year model, a certain bike.
Right.
And they're all internationals, and he loves it. He gets on there and talks to the most like-minded people of his life, because
that's cool.
He's not going to go down the street and talk to someone who wants to talk about a certain motorbike and made in. He can talk to a guy about the exhaust on it, for 3 weeks straight, and that's what we do, right? Us like-minded golf coaches. I guess in my area there are other golf coaches around, but I'm probably the only kind of career golf coach that's in here, and
got you. Yeah.
I love coaching, and I love talking golf swing, and I love talking technique, and I love helping golfers, where a lot of coaches in my area here, my environment, they're like part-time coaches, and I say that they do it for and earn $50 for a case of beer in the weekend, where, I live and breathe this all night long. I've got a Zoom call tonight at 10 today. So it brings us all together, right?
100.
Hey, it's been fun, Steve. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a long one. I'm going to break this up into two. And, What does your day look like today? What have you got on?
Oh, so I've got a combination of online lessons I've really got to get to. I've let a few like slip for about 3 days. So that's yeah, just video responses,
Yeah.
analysis and stuff. I've got to try and get two YouTube videos finished today as well, which editing.
Yes.
Yeah, and whole I've got 18 holes of on course lessons in the afternoon. So I've got to try and yeah, so I've got to squeeze it in, and plus a gym session. So pretty stock day.
Hey, I tell
Stock
you
day off.
I tell you as well, right? For the coaches listening as well, is that what I like about, I guess, our lives in particular as well, right, Steve, in our coaching world, is that are different each day. You know what I mean by like our online coaching, our in-person coaching, my
Yeah,
podcast or your YouTube creation, Instagram creation.
yeah,
It offers a lot of variety. And I think it's a lot better than
totally.
sitting on the range for 12 hours a day, knocking out 12 hours of straight half-hour lessons, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can kind of almost go anywhere in the world and do what we do
Yeah.
because I think we've kind of worked for it to kind of create either brand or presence or just goodwill. Yeah,
Yeah.
with other coaches and whatnot. So
I love it.
it's
All right,
fun.
brother. I appreciate you coming on.
I will speak soon.